professor at Temple University and is visiting us today to give the signature talk this semester for our Professional Development Series. Dr. Toth has a doctorate in Spanish and applied linguistics from the University of Pittsburgh, and he's currently teaching at Temple University. He's held appointments at the University of Pittsburgh, University of Akron, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His research focuses on second language the second language classroom, and with a particular focus in Spanish. Currently, he has a lot of projects. We just talked last night about one of his projects. One of his major projects is trying to finish up a monograph to be published by Routledge on the ways that cognitive and social theories of language and language learning can inform classroom practice. And today he will talk to us about communicative tasks. So welcome, Dr. Toth.
Thank you. It's a real honor to be here. So thank you for coming on a Friday afternoon. And when I left Philadelphia yesterday, it was 80 degrees and rainy. And then I got to Chicago, and it was sunny and 50. And then I got here, and it was cloudy and 45. So, but I heard like the front is coming. Winter is coming, you know. So it's on the way. But so when I get back to Philadelphia, it'll be cold. But, so how many of you are language instructors now? Okay. How many of you are? How many of you have been language instructors? I guess probably most everybody. Okay. Do you have people who are teaching Spanish as a second language? Okay. And English as a second language? Okay. And then I guess a lot of other languages there too. This study is kind of, it's a study and a talk meant to look at the issue of how do you contextualize, focus on form within purportedly communicative interactions between teachers and learners. And the examples and data I'm going to be showing you are in the context of like a whole class activity or task. So we'll just kind of go right into the overview is I want to kind of argue about what contextualization means, because I think we all have an idea that you have to contextualize your language use. And oftentimes when we say that, we're thinking about, well, if you're going to focus on form, you got to try to make it real somehow and give it some kind of a real context. And I kind of want to challenge that by saying that contextualization is a cognitively and socially negotiated phenomenon. So meaning that your brain has to align to context, and it is something that when say that you're using language communicatively, it has to be something that is negotiated between two people trying to do that same thing. So we're going to outline assumptions, underlying cognitive and social approaches to language development, identify blind spots in their thinking, and describe consequences for pedagogical practice. And then I want to show you some data from a classroom study that I published a little while ago in Modern Language Journal on the coherence of grammar, integration, and communicative tasks, and then talk about theory and practice. So some of the questions we'll consider is, is there more to comprehensible input than simply simplifying your structures and making familiar vocabulary? Have you heard the name Stephen Krashen? Yeah, okay. It's really interesting. And people kind of laugh. I'm assuming the chuckle is like, yeah, we've heard of Stephen Krashen. And I think a lot of people in a post-secondary level are thinking of, yeah, he was this guy in the 80s, and he kind of had some, he had some ideas that were important, but maybe overstated in terms of what, their implications were for language learning. But when you work with K through 12 teachers, especially here in North America, it's still like the hottest thing, and it's more recent than it is for post-secondary people. There's like big movements for comprehensible input classrooms. And Steve Krashen and a bunch of other people have kind of moved on from academic research to sort of doing professional development workshops for language teachers who are just desperately trying to get out of grammar translation stuff, even now in the 21st century when grammar translation, had its heyday in the last century. So it's an important question to keep asking and coming back to. Why is teacher feedback so inconsistent in getting learners to focus on accuracy? This, I think, is a question that I think is still relevant for some people working out of an interactionist framework or a cognitive framework where the idea is you just sort of, give some feedback, and it's sort of like push the button of the feedback and then out comes the noticing, and but research has also shown that it's not always, doesn't work as planned. Why doesn't asking personalized questions get learners to talk about themselves? So you're trying to foster communication and a communicative method. You ask some learners questions. What have you done today? What are your plans for the weekend? And I think a lot of us who've taught language can know that can 50-50 chance of it flopping or not, depending on how you set it up. And how can we possibly get learners to focus on on accuracy and develop communicative skills? So those are the questions. And this is the context for the talk is also that I think language instruction in different contexts, like what's considered legitimate language instruction in different contexts varies widely. And there's like this is the Grand Canyon, and we see like the chasm between often K through 12 instruction and post-secondary instruction. And sometimes there's also another chasm between second language researchers who are talking about task-based instruction, and they're talking about the ideal way to teach and to make meaningful experiences in the classroom, and they're really, when you look at what they're saying, it's like, it sounds like we're talking about different planets. So I'll read this because the text is a bit small. So this is an article, this picture here comes from the Baltimore Sun, and they're talking about innovative foreign language teaching in elementary schools. And this was a picture that came with it. I don't know, have you ever had the experience of I listen to National Public Radio a lot, and they'll be talking about, and this great language program, or moving into the elementary schools. And then you hear all these repetition drills going on, like, yeah, language in the elementary schools, and they're all like, azul, rojo, they're just reciting colors, and, they kind of have a Sesame Street idea of what it means to learn a foreign language. And they're kind of, this is what I saw too, Tyler Harrington, 10 years old, says he is happy to learn the language because some of his friends speak Spanish. Nice social motivation there that I think is something that we want to build on as educators. But here we go. He repeated Spanish words into a headset, and as he worked at the computer last week with Spanish lessons. So, yeah, Spanish in the Baltimore Public Schools. And that was, presented with approval. This I just grabbed off a website from University of Minnesota, came up quickest on the Google search. They're talking about their undergraduate language program. Students develop a strong ability to think, write, and communicate in another language through diverse course offerings, service learning experience, and study abroad. Okay, not through sitting in a lab and repeating Spanish words into a microphone. This is, guys, this is our good language instruction. And then we have research. This is Michael Long, sort of one of the leading scholarly founders of task-based second language instruction, saying that tasks are the real-world communicative uses to which learners will put the second language beyond the classroom. The things they will do in and through the second language, and the task syllabus stands alone, not as one strand in a hybrid of some kind. So kind of uncompromising on, this is how I define tasks, and this, if you're going to be a task-based language teacher, is what it means. Okay, take it or leave it. Obviously not, listening with headphones. And service learning, Mike Long probably likes the idea of service learning, but tasks, right? So we're not really on the same page. And this is my little diagram. If I ever do finish this lovely monograph. You'll see it there. Actually, I used a publication in Modern Language Journal. Trying to show that everything is kind of, there are different layers of influence on what happens in the classroom and how effective it is and the impact that it has on learners. And I'm kind of showing the circles one inside the other because it's meant to show sort of like the scope of each factor. So some second language research and classroom research focuses on kind of what's going on between ears in the minds of learners as sort of idealized participants in a classroom. And there's so much to explore there between different kinds of knowledge, explicit knowledge, implicit knowledge, and processing. And the goal is to kind of just see what do we all have in common as human beings that we can say about language learning and processing that could inform language instruction. But we kind of know that whatever processing is going on in the minds of every individual is taking place in the context of classroom tasks and interaction. I'll just be like Vanna White here. Just like what actually is designed in the classroom is providing all that sensory data, meaningful activity, opportunities to focus attention. They're being manipulated by classroom tasks and interaction. And what gets decided as a good classroom task and a good interactional design is in turn highly influenced by participant roles and expectations. So what is a teacher thinking that he or she should be doing as the leader of classroom discourse? How are learners given opportunities as participants in classroom discourse to engage meaningfully with the language? And where those roles come from, highly determined by sociocultural norms. So, if it's kind of looked at in a local community that, isn't it great we've got kids speaking into a microphone and repeating a list of vocabulary words, that's kind of what's considered good Spanish practice, then that sets up certain implications for what the roles of those learners are, and then what the tasks are, and then what kind of language processing is taking place. Okay, so it's all interrelated. You could say there's pushback effects here, the limits on what learners can handle at any one time of new information and unfamiliar processing and so on. That pushes back on how they're going to perform in classroom tasks. And then learners successfully or not successfully performing the classroom tasks then has an impact on what the teacher sees and then decides they're going to do with their tasks and so on. So it's kind of, the arrows go in both directions. Okay? How does instruction affect second language development? How you answer the question depends on your beliefs about the nature of language and the nature of language learning. And I want to kind of pose to you that whatever, as a language teacher, whatever you believe explicitly about the nature of language and language learning, and whatever you are invested in as a belief about language teaching and the nature of language itself, whatever that may be, everything you do in the classroom implies some kind of assumption about the nature of language and language learning. So a lot of us, as researchers, due to time constraints, due to just the effort of working within a cognitive or a social paradigm, you kind of have to stay there because you got to get your research out, you got to advance an agenda, and it's hard to understand and keep up with what's going on in two different branches of thinking. But classrooms are cognitive and social spaces. And teachers don't really have the luxury of pretending that both are not implicated in what they're doing. Teachers may kind of invest all in one or the other, like, I'm going to do a comprehensible input classroom. I'm going to do just what Crescent said, CI, comprehensible input, I+1, and not really be aware of the social stuff going on. But by whatever choices they're making have these social implications. All right. So I think it's helpful for language teaching to try to do as best we can to be on top of understanding both sides of the equation. So this is just a little, my own sort of summary of a cognitive view of learning, which focuses learners more as individuals than as social participants, and making a distinction that's supported by evidence from brain imaging, that we have two kind of major memory systems: declarative knowledge about the world, in this case about the second language, that was, that's the domain we're interested in, and implicit knowledge of how to do things and carry them out as quickly and efficiently as possible. And as you're exposed to L2 input and sensory information, you build both knowledge systems. And a lot of people would say that the one doesn't change into the other, but it maybe influences indirectly how the other develops. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But current models of cognitive psychology also say that when you have a moment of paying attention to whatever's in front of you, whatever you're trying to process visually, auditorially, or whatever, all of the relevant background knowledge sources in the brain are called into duty for the act of interpreting what's going on and deciding how to act. And there's sort of a limited capacity of new information that can be brought into that task, and that's called working memory. Okay, so that's what my little blue circle is. So you're paying attention to something, and then as you try to make sense of what's going on and decide what you're going to do about it, your brain is doing the best it can to get the most grab and go, easy way to interpret and act. So drawing on declarative and procedural knowledge to figure out what's going on and then figure out what you want to do about it. From a social point of view, that kind of those distinctions about different kinds of knowledge and how they work together are just kind of set aside as not of the most interest. They're mostly interested in what you actually do. However you explain it by different kinds of underlying knowledge, it's what's going on in the real world. How are you engaging in meaningful activity as a participant in some kind of contextual world? Okay, so there's a priority placed on what's called agency, which is your ability to not just act independently, but act independently to do things that are meaningful to you. And it also encompasses how you see the world as creating possibilities for you to do that. So it's how you would act independently, but based on your understanding of what's available to help you do that. So it's kind of a two-way thing. It's not like I can do anything. It's how I can do anything within what I understand to be the possibilities. So it's sort of a jointly negotiated thing. And then as you're kind of working with somebody to do something together, you're also trying to figure out where they're focusing their attention and what their intentions are in this activity together. And I think that's kind of a really amazing thing when you think about it. I mean, I was doing some reading on this concept. It's called intersubjectivity, the shared understanding of what you're doing. And isn't it really amazing that you've got, your mind is taking place physically in this space in your skull, right? And we have this symbolic system that's randomly taking sounds, but then systematically it's random, which sound gets associated with what meaning, but it's a system, and through this symbolic system, I can sort of get inside your head, even though I'm only in my head, right? You are only in your head, and we have this shared symbolic system, and we can imagine what's going on in each other's heads, and then try to adapt our behavior accordingly. I mean, I think that's kind of amazing. And I think that's kind of what the social theorists are most in awe about. You can decide once you sort of pay attention and kind of get a sense of what is going on in this shared activity, you can decide to participate or not. You could be I see what's going on here, and I don't like it one bit. So I'm just going to check my phone. We've had students do that. Or, something more drastic, like argue back or resist. Or you could be like, yeah, no, this is it, I'm in, so yeah, raise my hand. Or, yeah, what is the ending of that verb? So you kind of, but your decision is based on what you understand to be going on, okay? And then this is another word you hear in social speak. That's the other thing, like all these theories, like you gotta like choose your special words, right? To like show that I'm a social spirit. Those are not, that's not opportunities for action, they're affordances. Yeah, that's right. It's not, and then on the cognitive, it's not short-term memory. No, it's working memory. Working memory, like, so when you say these words, you're sort of marking yourself as belonging to one camp or another. So affordances are just like, here, you understand what's going on, that creates opportunities for your potential action. It's called an affordance. So, okay. But when it comes to like, teachers saying, what do I do with my class? How do I design a lesson that works, or how do I design a lesson that can focus on accuracy while also building communication skills? The line, the answers are not 100% obvious. So, the stuff that theorists and researchers are trying to deal with are complex, right? And then in trying to come up with an explanation for it, they're often very abstract explanations. And then, because it requires so much time and investment to engage in research that answers those kind of questions, it can be a very narrow perspective, and then there's often few concrete pedagogical implications. And I mean, this is the thing that I feel most concerned about as someone who does classroom research, is that I think there's a lot of, as I do more reading and everything, it kind of makes sense. I can see I can see how this would really, what we know about second language development could and should inform language teaching. But I don't think it's getting out to teachers for a lot of different reasons. And I think especially in K through 12 settings, there's kind of a crisis of not being sure what's going on, but desperately wanting something to change so that it's not drill, drill, drill all the time. And I'm sure post-secondary instruction has some of that going on too. So again, like a teacher has to decide here what to do, but then you have to the teacher also has to make sense out of, what are some of the relevant things we know about learner psycholinguistic processes? What are some of the things we know about the way people behave in social situations and make social meaning to inform classroom tasks and interaction? And I think, there's a teacher training problem, I think, that we need to address. So anyway, if a teacher were, I think, looking from a cognitive perspective for advice, I think these are some of the things that they would come up with. Speak comprehensively in the L2, provide feedback and grammar explanations, and be sure that learners speak meaningfully and all will be well. So, and this is maybe controversial, but short grammar explanations. You don't spend the whole class teaching grammar, but research has shown that some awareness of grammatical patterns helps, feedback helps in the context of something meaningful. So be sure that learners are speaking meaningfully and all will be well. From a social perspective, provide ample models for learners to emulate. That's kind of the correlate to this, but said from a social perspective. Teach grammar as real communication, so kind of that's that. And provide targeted help with speaking and everything will be fine. So is that enough to keep our teachers on the right track? So I think do we have sound? I forgot to, if I just hit the play here. So this is just a little bit for your amusement. But if you think about those things, so comprehensible, meaningful, feedback, okay? And I'm just going to test this. I know where I have to forward it to, but let me just make sure there's volume.
Very good. In the beginning, the woman says, just
Okay,
from
so
the
my
sound,
question
okay,
is-
and later.
My question is, like, couldn't what you see here be understood as meeting all those criteria of good language teaching? So see if you think, like, and this teaching method, of course, was meant to be cutting edge 40 years ago. That's why the video's a little scratchy.
You'll be able to see it in writing. So, from the beginning, the woman says, good morning.
Good morning.
The man says, good morning, madam.
Good morning, madam.
Okay. Good morning, madam. Would you like to have the cleanest house in town?
Good morning, madam. Would you like to have the cleanest house in town?
Yes, of course I would.
Yes.
Comprehensible.
Then you need then, madam, you need the amazing Hoover vacuum cleaner.
Yes, madam. You need the amazing Hoover vacuum cleaner.
No, I don't. What? Why not?
Why not? Why not?
What? Why not?
Why not? Why not?
What? Why not?
Why not?
Okay, use the gestures.
Use the
What?
gestures.
What?
Come on,
Why
people.
not?
Why not?
Try it with your hands. Use your hands.
Why not?
Look, this is contextualization.
Okay, my husband, why not? Okay.
Okay, so I think we would recognize this as a audio-lingual methodology, but founded on some of the very principles that we still are coming up with now. And I guess when you become more experienced in understanding second language development and learning, you can see where some maybe good ideas were just taken in the wrong direction or given too much emphasis, overstated. But I think we have to do a better job of understanding how to work on providing learners with structural resources to actually make them their own and use them authentically. The hope here was that by doing all these authentic contextualized discourse, that learners would just get all these dialogues and then just extrapolate on their own. There wasn't an understanding of learner agency or learners, the context that learners would want to, use these models in. That just comes. There's a context there. Just take it and go do whatever you want. Go to your dorm and ask your, ask your roommate if they want to buy a vacuum cleaner. Okay, so I'm gonna. What I want to do is. All right. I'll go through this quickly. So, so I think a question that I'd like to go through by showing you this study is what some of the literature has said about how to make accuracy relevant within communication. So one is, and this is kind of again illustrates that there's advice coming about all different ways, and I think it's confusing for a lot of teachers, and I think you don't sort out the confusion as a teacher until you just try out a bunch of things with your own experience. You say, okay, I'm supposed to do some grammar explanation, but not too much. Provide some feedback, but sometimes feedback doesn't work. Do group work, but sometimes that flops, and sometimes it goes great. And you have to figure out, like, how am I supposed to do this? Okay, so there's, different open-ended questions, teacher-led explanations, but communicative, don't do teacher-led grammar explanations, do communicative group work, open-ended rather than display questions, recasted feedback, making target structures essential, getting learners to use target structures overtly through consciousness raising. There's a lot of different suggestions. And I think what is going to be the answer to this is trying to understand learner let me back this up. I think the solution is going to be trying to get an understanding of where learners are in their understanding of what we're asking them to do, to sort of work out for ourselves and be very open and sensitive to this intersubjectivity, this joint attention to what are the goals of this activity and what are the means that I, as a teacher, am setting out for learners to accomplish it. And so, and I think I'm kind of giving you the answer before we show you the study, but I think being accurate is a goal, and being accurate within communication can be a goal, but it has to be known and explicit and very clear in learners' minds as this is what we're supposed to be doing here. And so I think a lot of times we are trying to focus on accuracy incidentally and casually without it being clear that that's what we're doing. So kind of bear that in mind as I look at two different classroom excerpts here. So classroom A had a hidden grammar focus. They were both second semester Spanish classes. And we're going to look at just a beginning first 10 minutes of class where there were 3 activities each. So in this one class, it was a hidden grammar focus, whereas classroom B was to practice grammar communicatively, but it was understood that they were working on accuracy. So it wasn't mechanical, like just plug and chug. They were saying things that had a purposeful function, but they understood that they were doing this to practice a particular structure. Am I missing something? Oh yeah, just, so I said this, so they're both beginning L2 classes in the same undergraduate curriculum, and they were college students aged 18 to in their upper 20s. It was a, and there was a lot of, like 50% of their grades depended on class participation. So they were supposed to participate in class to get a good grade. The classes met for 50 minutes a day, 5 days a week. So just to give you a breakdown of what was, what was in each class. In Class A, which is the hidden grammar agenda, there's 13 learners, and Class B with a more overt grammar agenda with 18. They're both female speakers, one native, one very near native. The target structure is present perfect in this class. So that's very much like English with an auxiliary verb equivalent to have and then a past participle. And then the target structure in the other class was a passive construction with this pronoun se. So Spanish is spoken here. And the lesson objective was to use, over here, present perfect to ask learners about recent leisure time activities and make comparison with peers. So this was really like supposed to be communicative. Like, so we're supposed to be using have done, I have eaten, I have watched a movie, so what have you done this week? And oh, you have studied this week? Have you studied this week? Kind of a teacher-led whole class discussion, making comparisons between what learners were saying. On the other side, with the passive say, is not as communicative in the sense of not providing unknown information, but there were a bunch of cities and states on the board that learners were looking at, and the teacher was asking them where different products are made and what is done in different places, where does one go to the beach, where are automobiles made, where is cheese made, so just going through places like that. In Class A, we had, the teacher first started out by, she had pictures of leisure activities on the board, and they were on little cards, and she was just trying to get them to think of the vocabulary. So what's this person doing in this picture? They're watching TV. What's they doing in this picture? They're, I don't know, painting a picture. I think there was an artist. What's this person doing? Reading. And then, okay, so what of these activities have you done, you guys? What have you done? What have you done? And then the third phase was, okay, so you, Susan has watched television. What about you? Have you watched television? To kind of do a comparison. So that was her 3 steps. So what makes it communicative is that the target structure was incorporated into personalized questions with learners and follow-ups. There was attention to L2 form through recasted teacher feedback, which is what is strongly recommended in a lot of task-based instruction, only do that recasting incidentally, okay? Not intentionally, because you focus on the meaning, and then just when the error comes up, then you just kind of remind them what the right thing is. Okay, so only recasted feedback. And the third task required learners to respond based on previous learners' answers, so they had to be listening to what other people were saying. Now, the class B, several learners, the teacher just started the class by asking several learners, how are you doing today, and follow-ups. Then she got up to the cities. There were 12 US cities and states on the board, and they had to identify which ones were associated with different products and activities. And then she asked learners to, on their own, now we've gone over these, what other things can you think of for these cities and states on the board? Okay. So the communicative characteristics of that lesson were that the target structure was used meaningfully to give geographical information, not unknown information though. This wasn't like information exchange, it was more like display. Teacher accepts multiple responses from individuals before posing a new question or prompt, and problems with target structure accuracy were addressed overtly within a whole class discussion by soliciting peer assistance through collaborative problem solving. Okay, so now, in the interest of time, I might just, well, the videos are going to take a while, but in the interest of time, you can see that this class A gets off to a very slow start. And I don't know, like you kind of do have to see the video to like get it. I'll just give you like a minute of it maybe. It was a cathedral learning. There you go. Okay, so, all right, so you know that you don't have to know Spanish to just listen to the pacing of the questions and the responses. So she's asking them like, which of these activities on the board are ones that you've done this week? Okay.
Vosotros habéis hecho esta semana. ¿Qué actividades vosotros habéis hecho esta semana? ¿Qué actividades?
What have you done this week?
Has mirado la televisión esta semana. Has mirado la televisión. Más cosas. ¿Eso es esta semana? Sí, ¿qué has
He
hecho
says, repeat.
esta
Can you repeat,
semana?
please?
¿Qué has hecho esta semana? Eso. ¿No? ¿Qué has hecho esta semana? ¿Has pintado? ¿De eso? ¿Has pintado?
He said, how do you say not anymore? She said, have you painted? How do you say not anymore?
No has pintado. ¿No has pintado?
Okay, so that stands in contrast to this.
Venga, vamos a ver. Aquí tenemos muchas ciudades y estados.
So here's the cities and states on the board.
Pregunta. Entre estas ciudades y estados, ¿dónde se producen muchos carros?
Where are many cars
¿Dónde se
made?
producen muchos carros? Venga,
Lansing,
dime
Michigan.
todas las partes. ¿Repito la pregunta? ¿Dónde se producen muchos carros? Bien. ¿En dónde se produce? Venga, no está perfecto. ¿Cómo es? Check. ¿Muchos carros o mucho carro?
She's giving feedback there.
Perfecto, muy bien. Venga, ¿y dónde se cultivan naranjas? ¿Dónde se cultivan naranjas?
Okay, so I think you can appreciate that the second class is moving along sort of more fluidly. And that's kind of what I was interested in. My interest in this study dates back to my early days as a language teacher when I would try to do these communicative conversations with students. And sometimes they would go like the second time, and then other times it's like nothing. Like you can hear the crickets chirping in the background, and like what is going on? And so I was interested from a cognitive perspective because oftentimes, I mean, this is uncontrolled. This is not a controlled situation, but in cognitive research, when they're doing lab conditions, longer processing time is associated, longer latency is associated with longer processing time. So it's, I mean, it's clearly not a clean measure of that, but it seems like, why are you getting answers with sometimes when you do this, and they come quickly, and other times you don't, and everybody's looking at you like, what are you saying, or what do you want me to do? So, so I looked at the silence measured from the end of the teacher initiation to the beginning of the student utterance in both classes, and I looked at learner engagement measured as the number of learner turns and the distribution of turns among individuals. And this is what we have. So for class B, latency period, they were both about 9.5 minutes. Okay, so the mean latency is much less, and the amount of latency time in each class was much less on the second one than on the first one. Okay, so that's 4 minutes and 16 seconds of latency, of dead time, waiting for someone to answer. 4 minutes and 16 seconds out of 9 minutes and 30 seconds. So that's like that was painful, I think, for most people. When you take the latencies and you just plot them out in order, one by one, across the bottom, and you know, and then you see how long they are. So you see these are like actually the number of turns in the whole segment as well. You can see that in this first class with the long latencies, there's many that go over 5 seconds. And a lot of times in teacher education, they say, well, you know, when you're asking a question to a whole class, give them wait time to think of an answer. Usually that's like 3 seconds. They always, you know, say sort of count to 3. So when you're getting latencies of up to 20 or 30 seconds, you know they've had plenty of time to think. All right, something else is going on there. Okay. And what's kind of interesting here, these are the 3 activities I identified, so white, gray, and black. You can see that these are just punctuated at various times throughout the second activity and then this other activity. And then here, there's a few towards here, and then this one at the very beginning. And I think the reason that you get, it's interesting to look at the transcripts. We'll look at it a little bit. We don't have a lot of time, but look at it a little bit to see like what's going on here. But generally, this is the first question where the teacher says, okay, she says, you know, now we've talked about products and activities at these different cities and states. So now what other things can you think of? Okay, and doesn't it kind of make sense that when you get that question that would be a long one? Okay, and then once that ball gets rolling, you're back down to very few. Okay, and what you see going on here is this teacher, I'm giving this away because we gotta hurry along here and not take too much time. What's going on is the teacher is often, I don't know if you could tell in the thing in the initial video, she asks the question and then calls on somebody and then like picks that person out, okay, to provide an answer. And then when they start to, then when you get like one of these, then she'll change the question to say, well, is it this or is it this? And that's often what teachers are told to do. You ask an open-ended question, it doesn't work, try going down to an either-or question. But what you can see is she's actually pinning down one person and changing what's being asked of that person within a matter of seconds. Okay, so kind of what I wanted to show you is that students are trying to align with what's being asked of them. And if you put yourself in your student's place, when you ask a question to a whole class, everybody who's paying attention, and you know, most people are thinking of what do they mean, what do they want me, based on what they mean, what do they want me to do? And now that I understand what I'm supposed to do, what's the grammar and vocabulary that I need to do it? And then, am I sure enough of myself to risk raising my hand and trying it and being wrong? Right? So you can imagine how that process of those 4 things going through maybe every student's mind when the teacher asks one question might inhibit all but the best students from participating. But then, like, so if you just say, like, so tell me, everybody, what other cities and states, what other activities are going on here in this, you know, what other activities go on in these cities and states? big, long wait while people start going through that process, and then one person answers. And then they give that answer, right? And then the next thing that happens in the transcript is not a new question, but another opportunity to ask that same question. And now the people who have gone through that 4-step process of thinking of the answer, what is she saying? What does she mean by what she's saying? How do I answer? Do I have the vocabulary for it? Now they've not only gone through all that already, but they also see a model because someone else answered, and then the teacher goes, oh yeah, very good, or work on the agreement here, okay? And the whole point of that beginning of that activity is now still alive and active over another opportunity to participate. So someone else answers, and then you get even more feedback. And then the next person can still answer, okay? And that line of what are we doing, that intersubjectivity is maintained over the course of several terms. Whereas along here, what's happening is the teacher seems to be getting nervous is ask a question, not getting an answer, and then, like, so I can, well, I think it'll take too much time to go to the, I'll act it out instead of showing you on the transcript. So she's saying, what other things have you done this week? That's a question to everybody, okay? It takes a long time. And as we saw down here, those kind of questions will at the beginning. She doesn't get an answer and says, have you painted? Okay, now that whole first question is out. And then, like, what is pintado? What is that? Painted? And then, so, I don't know, have I painted? And then, so she's asking if I painted. No, I haven't. And do I want to answer or not? And then, so, then the next thing the teacher does is say, no answer to that, say, have you painted? Okay, so now that person is on the spot, and everybody else is like, right? I don't have to pay attention to that. Okay? So as the teacher gets nervous and starts figuring out how to get participation, please, 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 it's like not keeping the same pragmatics, the same discourse objective alive for the whole class. It's constantly, it's a moving target. So anyway, so these are extra details, and since we've got minutes, I'm going to skip over. This is just extra detail. We can just show that there was only a handful of students who participated, with any great amount in the first class, and that it was a bigger class on the second one, but more people gave 4 or more turns. So there was, it encouraged a greater classroom collaboration. So I kind of talked about all this, but this is kind of the discussion I'd like to bring out, is that comprehensible discourse depends on cohesion, or ability to perceive others' intended meanings and link them together as logically developed propositions. So when the teacher's asking a question, like, what does the teacher mean by that? What is my behavior, my ideal behavior supposed to be? And what I think that means for focusing on form within communication is, like, am I telling you what I did this week and that's all? Or am I supposed to be doing something else as well? So if you hang around for the workshop, we'll go into the transcripts more in greater detail. But here's the thing, there's instances that I can show you here, where this is the beginning of that. The teacher says, this is the beginning of class A. The teacher says, let's see, what activities have you done this week? What activities have you done this week? Tell me, Jason. And he says, I'm probably going to watch television. He's missed the cue to use that target structure, right? And she gives recasted feedback because that's what she's supposed to do. So she says, you have watched television? And then he says, yeah. And then she says, this week? And he says, probably. Okay? And then she says, you've watched television. And then, so that went totally over his head because the objective was not clear to them. Okay? So if you want people to focus on form, they have to know that that's what you want them to do. And actually, Susan, what are your research in 20,000 or
20,000.
2000 with McDonough and
Mackey,
Mackey.
yeah,
That was one of the first things that put that on my mind, is these like examples of all these recasts where a lot of learners just thought they were chatting and they didn't get it as feedback. Okay, so that's my kind of takeaway message, and I think I have an end slide here that I can skip over and get to that. We were talking about all this stuff. And I said, we'll do some of this in the workshop if you want to hang around. So yeah, these are my end slides, and then we'll stop. So in order to focus on L2 form, accuracy must be understood by all as a discourse goal. They have to know that that's what's intended, and they have to know that what are the means of accomplishing it. Here's this stuff that you're going to use, and I think that was clear in the other class. Like, they knew they were doing this say, and they knew they were doing this passive, and she was giving them feedback on getting the verb ending right when you put the passive in there. Okay? So as a subtle form of feedback, recast may not clearly convey accuracy as a teaching goal during conversation practice. And in whole class accuracy-focused interaction, teachers should allow multiple learners to attempt a response. So accuracy is a collaborative effort. When one learner struggles to correct an utterance, other learners can help as well. And that only works when it seems like we're all working on this together and we have one joint focus of attention that everybody's working from. Okay, so here's some advice on lesson planning, but here's my last statement, which I did write out here. So when teachers speak, the whole community of learners is listening and trying to interpret what the teacher means by what she is saying and what she intends for them to do. The two biggest tools we have for creating a context that facilitates language learning are how we manipulate learners' attention and create meaningful language experiences over the long term. The accumulation of these long-term experiences create the basis for what our learners will come away with from our classes at the end of their years of schooling. And the extent to which those experiences give them a good send-off to do and be themselves in a new language is the ultimate measure of our success. So that's my concluding statement. Thank you. So I think we have a short amount of time for questions. I don't know if we like going at 2 o'clock, like people are out of here at 2, like maybe 5 minutes.
Yeah, we have some time for questions, and just to reiterate that we have a workshop from 2:30 to 4:30, I think we said, right? To work on this some more in deep in some of this. But I think we have a few minutes. You have to leave, obviously leave. There's still more food if you want to grab some more food. We will have coffee, so if you're, this is Friday afternoon, if you need some caffeine, that'll be coming. But yeah, if you have any questions, it would be great. Right now we do have some review forms that we're passing out for the talk, so please take a second to fill that out.
So,
question?
Kuhn, yeah?
Thanks, Paul. I agree with you on the focus the goal has to be really clear. But I also was wondering on, okay, why is this communication often not really taking off? And I feel that it also has to do with, we're talking about long-term experiences, but we don't have really long interventions. We don't really have long turns and long talks. We always have these like, I'm asking you something about what did you do last week,
right.
And then I go to the next one.
Right.
And basically, I'm not really interested in what you did last week. And I'm kind of like
wow.
trying to elicit a certain form.
Right.
And I think students just know that as well.
Yes, I think you're right. And that's, so I want to develop that in the workshop. So like this whole class, like question answer thing is not, is an example.